In the Line of Fire, Chapter 1, First Collision. The first thing Lila Bennett noticed about the ER at St. Augustine's Hospital was the noise. Not just the beeping monitors, the rolling gurneys, or the shrill ring of phones, but the cacophony of voices. Urgent, clipped, overlapping. It was chaos, but somehow controlled chaos, and she loved it. Her heart beat faster as she adjusted the strap of her stethoscope around her neck and stepped through the automatic doors. She'd trained for this. Long nights in nursing school, countless rotations, and too many cups of bad coffee had led her here. To her first official shift as an ER nurse at one of the busiest trauma centers in the city. She inhaled deeply, the sterile scent of antiseptic and sharp tang of latex filling her lungs, and reminded herself, "You belong here, Lila. You've earned this." But within the first 15 minutes, she ran directly into him, Dr. Adrian Hale. She didn't know his name yet, only the reputation. Whispers from other nurses in the locker room. He's a genius, but God help you if you screw up around him. Stone cold, no bedside manner. Looks like he hasn't smiled in years. And as he loomed over the trauma bay, barking orders like a general on a battlefield, she understood exactly what they meant. He was tall, lean, shoulders squared under his dark scrub top. His dark hair was unruly, shoved back from his forehead as though he had better things to do than tame it. His jaw was set hard enough to crack steel, and his eyes, icy gray, sharp as scalpels, sliced across the room, taking in every detail, every movement, missing nothing. Lila had just wheeled a fresh trauma patient in, her hands steady on the gurney rails, though her stomach fluttered nervously. The man on the stretcher was bleeding badly from a motorcycle crash, and adrenaline pushed her focus into razor-sharp clarity. She held pressure to the wound, calling out vitals to the team. Then Dr. Hale was there. "What are his SATs?" he demanded, his voice low but cutting through the din. 91 and dropping, Lila answered quickly, keeping her palm pressed to the patient's abdomen. "Get another line in." "Prep for transfusion," Hale ordered, not even glancing at her. His eyes were already on the wound, on the monitors, on everything except her face. She swallowed her irritation and shifted to start the line. But when she reached for the tray, his hand shot out, blocking her. His gloved fingers caught her wrist with surprising firmness. He finally looked at her, and that storm gray stare nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. "What are you doing?" he asked coldly. Her lips parted. "Starting the line. You just ordered it. You're holding pressure. If you let go now, he'll bleed out faster. Do you think I need a nurse who can't prioritize in a trauma situation?" Heat rushed to her cheeks, part humiliation, part indignation. "I can multitask, doctor." Something flickered across his expression. Disbelief, maybe even annoyance that she dared to challenge him, but he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low growl meant only for her. "Not here. Not with me. You do what I tell you when I tell you and nothing else. Understood?" Her heart pounded. She wanted to snap back, to tell him she wasn't some meek little nurse he could bark at. But the patient's vitals alarmed again, and instinct overrode pride. She pressed harder on the wound and nodded stiffly. "Yes, doctor." The case unfolded in a blur of movement. Blood transfusion, airway secured, the surgeon's hands working with precision, while the team responded like extensions of his will. Lila held pressure until her fingers cramped, refusing to falter, even when sweat trickled down her temple. Finally, the bleeding was controlled enough for surgical transport. As the gurney rolled out, the room exhaled in collective relief. Lila peeled off her gloves, flexing her stiff hands, and looked up to find Hale watching her. His eyes weren't quite as cold now, but they were unreadable, as though he were dissecting her without a scalpel. "You didn't move," he said flatly. "Excuse me?" "Most new nurses panic. Let go. Freeze up. You didn't." She blinked, startled. Was that a compliment? But before she could answer, his mouth curved, not into a smile, never that, but into something sharper. "Don't mistake that for praise. Competence is the bare minimum I expect." Her jaw dropped. "You." but he was already turning away, stripping off his gloves, tossing them into the bin with finality. Conversation over. Lila's blood simmered. She wanted to chase after him, to demand he treat her like a human being, not a cog in his perfect little machine. But another call came over the intercom, another trauma inbound, and she was swept back into the storm. Still, she couldn't shake the heat of his words, or the infuriating way his presence seemed to linger like static electricity along her skin. Hours later, during a rare lull, she found herself at the nurse's station, sipping bad coffee and scribbling notes. Her body was sore, her feet ached, but her spirit remained unbowed, until his shadow fell across her chart. She looked up. Adrian Hale stood there, arms crossed, gaze fixed on her, as though she were a puzzle he hadn't quite solved. "You're still here," he said. She arched a brow. "It's a 12-hour shift. Where else would I be?" His mouth tightened as though her cheek tested his patience. "Most new hires don't last this long in my ER. Maybe I'm not like most new hires." Something in his eyes flickered again, that guarded storm cracking for the briefest second. But then he nodded once, curt and dismissive, and started to walk away. "Dr. Hale," she called after him, unable to resist. He stopped, shoulders tense, and turned just enough to glance back. She smiled, bright and stubborn, sunshine piercing through storm clouds. "I'll see you at the next trauma." His jaw clenched. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then, without a word, he walked off, his long strides carrying him down the hall away from her. But Lila had seen it, the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smirk, not quite approval, something softer. And for reasons she couldn't explain, it made her chest ache. She'd only just met Dr. Adrian Hale, but one thing was already clear. He was going to be a problem, a delicious, infuriating, impossible problem. In The Line of Fire, Chapter 2, Long Night Shift. The overnight shift was always brutal. The fluorescent lights never dimmed, the air conditioning never faltered, and the chaos never truly stopped. The ER pulsed like a heart that refused to rest, pumping in the sick, the broken, the desperate. Nurses and doctors staggered through the hours like soldiers in a war zone, sustained only by caffeine and stubborn willpower. And tonight, Lila Bennett had been assigned to work it, alongside Dr. Adrian Hale. She learned this fact at 10:58 p.m., standing at the assignment board while sipping her second cup of coffee. When she saw his name scrawled next to hers in sharp black marker, her stomach dropped. Of all the shifts, of all the partners, it had to be him. Her eyes narrowed as she sipped again, the bitter taste doing nothing to soothe the sting. Maybe fate had a cruel sense of humor. Or maybe, she thought with a grimace, the charge nurse was testing her. "You'll be fine," murmured Erin, another nurse, sliding up beside her, lips quirking in sympathy. "Just keep your head down and don't argue with him." Lila snorted softly. "You mean don't breathe, don't blink, and don't exist in his line of sight?" Exactly. But keeping her head down wasn't in Lila's nature. Sunshine didn't dim just because storm clouds glared at it. She was still telling herself that when Adrian Hale appeared at her side, tall and commanding in dark scrubs, his expression a mask of cool indifference. He glanced at her, then at the board, then back at her. His sigh was quiet but unmistakable. "Of course." "Problem, doctor?" she asked, tilting her head, her voice deceptively light. His gaze flicked to her, sharp and assessing, before he turned away. "No, let's get through this." So that was how it was going to be. The night dragged them into its rhythm quickly. A car crash with 2 victims came in before midnight. Adrian's orders were crisp, precise, his hands moving with almost frightening efficiency. Lila followed, anticipating needs, holding retractors, adjusting drips, sliding IVs into veins with quick competence. He didn't thank her. He didn't even look at her. But he didn't stop her either. It was as if, in his mind, she'd passed some silent test back in that first trauma. He still treated her like an extension of his will, but at least now he trusted her to function without questioning every move. And still, underneath the professionalism, there was tension, an undercurrent of energy that sparked whenever their hands brushed, uh, whenever their eyes met briefly across a patient's body. At one point, she leaned over to adjust a monitor, and when she turned, he was there, so close her shoulder brushed his chest. His breath grazed her temple, warm and startling in the sterile chill of the room. Her heart stuttered. She glanced up, and for a split second, his storm gray eyes met hers. Not cold, not calculating, but human. Exhausted, maybe even vulnerable. Then it was gone, shuttered behind steel. "Move," he said gruffly, and she stepped aside, cheeks hot. By 3 a.m., the ER had settled into a strange quiet. No traumas in the last hour, no ambulances wailing outside. Just the steady beeping of monitors and the occasional shuffle of a nurse down the hall. Lila found herself at the break room, hunched over a stale granola bar, her body aching in every joint. The door creaked, and Adrian entered, carrying a stack of charts. He looked worse for wear, dark circles smudging beneath his eyes, his hair mussed like he'd run his hands through it too many times. He stopped when he saw her. "This room's occupied." She arched a brow. "It's the break room, not your office." He stared at her a moment, as though debating whether she was worth the effort of a retort. Then, without a word, he dropped into the chair across from her. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the vending machine. Finally, Lila sighed. "You know, you could try not to be so grumpy all the time." His head lifted, those gray eyes narrowing. "Grumpy? Yes. Grumpy. You stalk around like you're allergic to basic human warmth." His lips thinned. "I don't have time for warmth. I have patience to keep alive. And we all don't?" she countered. "You're not the only one working here, Dr. Hale. The rest of us managed to do our jobs without looking like someone stole our last piece of candy." Something like amusement flickered at the edge of his mouth, quickly smothered. "You're too cheerful. It's exhausting." Her jaw dropped. Then she laughed, a soft, startled sound that echoed in the small room. "So that's my flaw. Too cheerful. God forbid someone tries to lighten the mood in this mausoleum." His gaze lingered on her then, longer than before. She could feel it, heavy and searching, as though he were peeling away layers she hadn't meant to reveal. "You'll burn out," he said quietly. "People like you always do. You care too much. This place will chew you up." The words hit her harder than she expected, a chill curling around her ribs, but she straightened her shoulders, refusing to let him see doubt. "Maybe," she said softly, "but I'd rather burn out than turn into stone." For the first time, his expression shifted. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, and a muscle ticked in his cheek. She'd struck something, hit a nerve buried deep. But instead of answering, he pushed to his feet, gathering his charts. Breaks over. And just like that, the walls slammed back into place. The rest of the shift blurred by. A stabbing victim. A heart attack. A young mother with a feverish child. They moved through it together, an unlikely pair bound by the rhythm of crisis. By the time dawn crept pale and gray through the narrow ER windows, Lila's body felt like lead. She peeled off her gloves one last time, dropped them into the bin, and leaned against the counter, exhaling. Adrian stood across the station, jotting notes, his posture as straight and rigid as it had been 12 hours ago. How did he do that? How did he never falter, never soften, never break? She pushed off the counter and started toward the lockers. As she passed him, she hesitated. "Good shift," she said lightly. He didn't look up. It was a shift. Her lips curved, equal parts exasperated and amused. "You're impossible." "Good," he muttered. But as she walked away, she could have sworn she heard him murmur, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. "Good work, Bennett." The words followed her down the hall, warming her like sunlight after a long, frozen night. And for the first time, she wondered if Adrian Hale's storm had cracks in it after all. Chapter 3. Cracks in the Armor. The ER always seemed busier on Fridays. By late afternoon, the waiting room was already overflowing, fluorescent lights casting sickly yellow across the faces of the restless, the desperate, the broken. Children cried, patients groaned. The intercom barked constant orders. The very air seemed charged, heavy with expectation. Lila Bennett tied back her hair as she moved briskly between beds. Every step reminded her how much she'd already endured this week. 2 back-to-back night shifts, an endless cascade of traumas, and one a particularly grumpy surgeon who had spent the last 72 hours lodged like a splinter beneath her skin. That splinter had a name, Dr. Adrian Hale. She'd stopped expecting thanks from him, or kindness, or even basic civility. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the faint, startling memory of his voice at the end of their last shift. "Good work, Bennett." Quiet, almost reluctant, as though the words had been dragged out of him against his will. She hadn't imagined it. She couldn't have. Because, damn it, the echo of it had warmed her in ways she didn't care to admit. Now, 3 hours into the Friday storm, she spotted him at the far end of the trauma bay, shoulders squared, face carved into that familiar granite mask. He was intubating a patient with such fierce precision that the room around him seemed to blur. His voice, low and commanding, cut through the chaos. She hated that she noticed the way the dark strands of his hair clung damply to his forehead. Hated that she caught the faint sheen of sweat across his neck, the roll of muscle beneath his scrub sleeves as he adjusted his grip. Hated that something about him, in all his gruff harshness, drew her like a flame. But she didn't have time to dwell. The ambulance bay doors burst open, and everything shifted. The patient came in on a stretcher, paramedics shouting over one another. Male, mid-30s, cardiac arrest at home. Wife performed CPR until EMS arrived. Downtime unknown. Lila's pulse quickened as she grabbed the code cart and pushed it toward the bed. They transferred the patient, chest rising unevenly beneath the oxygen mask. His skin was dusky, lips tinged blue. 35 minutes of compressions en route, one paramedic rattled off. He had a brief return of circulation, then crashed again. V-fib, another shouted, handing over strips. Charge to 200, Adrian barked, already sliding into position at the head of the bed. Lila attached pads, adrenaline buzzing through her bloodstream. "Clear," Adrian called, and the body jolted violently with the shock. No rhythm. Again. Shock. Nothing. "Epi," he snapped. Lila pushed the syringe, her hands steady, though her chest tightened with the creeping dread of futility. Minutes blurred into more minutes. Compressions. Shocks. Meds. Adrian's voice, sharp and relentless, refused to surrender. Sweat darkened his scrubs. His jaw clenched as he stared at the monitor, willing it to change, but it didn't. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the line flattened into a mocking, steady beep. Asystole. Silence rippled through the room, broken only by the ragged breaths of the team. Adrian stood frozen, gloved hands hovering uselessly in the air, his eyes, hard as flint, fixed on the monitor. Lila had seen him in dozens of cases now, fierce and unyielding, never cracking, never wavering. But now, he didn't call it, didn't move. "Doctor?" one of the residents asked hesitantly. Adrian's throat bobbed. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. "Time of death, 1842. The weight of the words seemed to crush him. The wife's wail echoed from the hall outside, a sound so raw it scraped bone. Lila's chest ached with it. But when she looked at Adrian, what she saw nearly undid her. He wasn't stone. Not now. His hands trembled faintly as he stripped off his gloves. His jaw worked as though he were grinding his teeth to keep from shattering. And his eyes, those storm gray eyes, were no longer cold. They were hollow. The sight hit her harder than she expected. Later, when the body had been taken away and the team dispersed, Lila found him alone in the supply room, leaning against the counter. His head was bowed, both hands braced on the steel surface, shoulders heaving with breaths that seemed too sharp, too uneven for the man who had always looked carved from iron. She hesitated at the door. She should walk away, give him space. But something rooted her in place. The same something that made her step quietly inside and close the door behind her. "Dr. Hale?" she said softly. He didn't move. For a moment she thought he hadn't heard her. Then his voice, rough and jagged, spilled into the silence. He was 36. Her chest tightened. He had a wife, kids. His hands slammed suddenly against the counter, the sound making her jump. 35 minutes. He should have made it. He should have. His voice cracked, and he cut himself off, jaw clenching hard enough to splinter. Lila's heart twisted. She'd seen doctors lose patients before. It was part of the job, a brutal reality. But Adrian, this wasn't just frustration. This was something deeper, something breaking beneath the weight of failure he refused to accept. She took a step closer, then another, until she was standing just beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his tense body. "It's not your fault," she whispered. His head jerked toward her, eyes blazing. "Don't." "Don't what? Don't tell me that." His voice was low, dangerous. "It was my fault. I should have gotten him back. I should have." "You did everything you could," she said firmly, her voice rising with sudden fire. "I was there, Adrian. I saw you. You gave him every chance. You fought for him harder than anyone could have." For a heartbeat, silence stretched, taut as a wire. His eyes burned into hers, stormy and wild, as if searching for the lie in her words. But there wasn't one. And maybe that was why his breath shuddered, why his shoulders sagged just slightly. Something inside her broke at the sight. Without thinking, she reached out and laid a hand over his forearm. His skin burned hot beneath the fabric of his scrubs, the muscle rigid, trembling faintly. He froze. For a moment she thought he'd pull away, that he'd shove her out of his carefully fortified walls. But he didn't. He let her touch linger. Her heart thudded wildly in her chest. She'd never seen him like this, unguarded, undone, and it made her want to hold him, to absorb his pain, to remind him he wasn't alone. But before she could, he drew in a sharp breath and jerked back, breaking contact. The walls slammed down again, his face returning to steel. "Get back to work, Nurse Bennett," he said flatly, turning away. The words cut. But the cracks, oh, the cracks were there now. She'd seen them, and she couldn't unsee them. That night, as she finally left the hospital and stepped into the cool air, Lila tilted her head toward the dark sky, her chest still aching. Dr. Adrian Hale wasn't stone. He was bleeding beneath his armor, and whether she wanted to or not, she was already falling into the gravity of his storm. Chapter 4: Collision Course. The hospital cafeteria at noon was always the worst. Harsh lights, stale coffee, and the faint smell of reheated food clinging to the air. Nurses huddled in groups, decompressing between shifts. Residents dozed at tables, heads pillowed on folded arms. But Lila Bennett had no such luxury. She sat across from Adrian Hale, the surgeon's storm gray eyes locked on her chart like the patient file had personally insulted him. His fork poked absently at a salad he hadn't touched. She wasn't sure how she'd ended up here. Some twisted cosmic joke. Cosmic, maybe? After another grueling morning of traumas, she'd been reaching for coffee when Adrian had appeared beside her, tossed his file onto the counter, and said curtly, "Lunch. Come on." No explanation. No room for refusal, just that low, commanding tone that somehow had her following before she'd thought to argue. Now, sitting across from him, she wondered if she should have resisted. "You realize," she said, stabbing her plastic fork into a limp piece of lettuce, that inviting someone to lunch usually involves basic manners. A please. Maybe a smile. Adrian didn't look up. "I didn't invite you." Her brow furrowed. "You literally told me to come." "That's not an invitation. That's efficiency." Her mouth dropped open. "You dragged me to lunch for efficiency?" He finally lifted his head, meeting her glare with that maddeningly calm gaze. "I need a nurse who knows my rhythm, who anticipates. Eating together saves time." Her fork clattered against the tray. "God, you're insufferable." "Accurate," he murmured, returning to his chart. Something inside her snapped. She leaned forward, voice low but laced with fire. "You know what your problem is, Dr. Hale? You think caring is weakness. You push everyone away so you don't have to feel anything. But here's the thing. You do feel. I saw it the other night. You're not made of stone, no matter how badly you want people to believe it. That got his attention. His head snapped up, eyes flashing. You don't know me, he said, voice edged like glass. No, she admitted softly, holding his gaze. But I see you. For a moment, silence stretched, electric and suffocating. His jaw tightened, his throat bobbed, and something raw flickered in his eyes before he tore his gaze away. Eat your lunch, Bennett, he muttered. But his voice lacked its usual bite. She leaned back, heart hammering, breath uneven. She'd pushed too hard, maybe, but she couldn't regret it. Not when she'd seen the way his armor had cracked, even for a second. By evening, the ER was chaos again. A pileup on the interstate had flooded them with patients, fractures, lacerations, a young man coding on arrival. Adrian and Lila worked side by side, their movements so synchronized it startled her. He barked an order. She was already moving. She called out vitals. He was adjusting meds before she finished speaking. It should have been seamless, but every brush of his arm against hers, every glance that lingered a fraction too long, felt like static crackling across her skin. At one point, she bent over the patient to suction blood from the airway, and Adrian's chest pressed against her back as he reached across for the laryngoscope. The contact was brief, incidental, utterly professional. Yet heat seared through her, pooling low and dangerous. Her breath caught. She froze for half a beat too long, and his hand stilled on the handle. She felt it, the hesitation, the awareness. Then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone. He finished the intubation, voice clipped, movements sharp. But she felt it, the unspoken thing crackling between them. Hours later, long after the pileup victims were stabilized or admitted upstairs, Lila found herself in the medication room, restocking vials. The tiny space was warm, quiet, a rare oasis from the storm. The door clicked open behind her. She turned, and there he was. Adrian Hale, filling the doorway like a shadow, his gray eyes darker than usual, something unreadable swirling in them. She swallowed. Need something? He didn't answer. Just stepped inside, letting the door swing shut. The click echoed in the stillness. Her pulse jumped. Bennett, he said finally, his voice low and rough. Yes? He stared at her, long enough that her skin prickled beneath the intensity. Then, abruptly, he shook his head. You're reckless. Her brows furrowed. Excuse me? You push lines you don't understand, he said tightly. You think caring is strength, but it's dangerous. It'll get you hurt. Her chest tightened, but she lifted her chin. So what? I'd rather care and get hurt than close myself off completely. He stepped closer, the space shrinking between them. You don't know what it's like. Then show me, she whispered, cutting him off. The words hung heavy, charged, filling the air with something sharp and aching. His jaw clenched, his hand lifted, hesitant, trembling slightly, then hovered just shy of her cheek. Her breath caught, her entire body strung taut, waiting, wanting. His eyes burned into hers, stormy and conflicted, desire and restraint warring in their depths. For one impossible second, she thought he would close the distance, that his mouth would finally crash into hers. But then, with a strangled curse, he jerked back. No. His voice was harsh, final, laced with pain. This can't happen. Her heart cracked, the sting sharper than she expected. Why not? Because I can't. He cut himself off, turning away, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Just don't. The door opened, light from the hallway spilling in, and then he was gone, leaving her standing in the silence, chest heaving, heart aching with all the words left unsaid. That night, as she lay in her small apartment bed, exhaustion heavy in her limbs, Lila stared at the ceiling and replayed the moment in the med room. The almost. The heat in his eyes. The way his hand had nearly touched her. She should have been furious. She should have told herself it was better this way. But instead, all she felt was the ache of something denied, something simmering just beneath the surface, waiting to ignite. Adrian Hale was a storm. And she was already standing in the rain. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. Storms had a way of finding St. Augustine. Tonight, Thunder cracked over the city, rain sluicing against the hospital windows and sheets. The ER buzzed louder than usual, filled with wet footsteps, soaked patients, and the restless hum that always came with bad weather. Lila Bennett was exhausted. She'd already been on her feet 10 hours, her scrubs damp from running through the ambulance bay earlier, her hair sticking stubbornly to her temples. But fatigue didn't matter, not when stretchers kept rolling in, not when people needed her. She was halfway through hanging fluids on a dehydrated teenager when the intercom blared. Code red, fire reported. Surgical wing sublevel 2, evacuate non-essential personnel. Her head snapped up, a fire. Nurses exchanged alarmed glances, and the charge nurse's voice cut sharp. Stay calm. ER staff stays put until reassigned. But less than 5 minutes later, orders changed. Half the trauma staff was pulled to assist with evacuation upstairs. And somehow, of course, Lila ended up paired with Dr. Adrian Hale. The stairwell was chaos. Smoke curled faintly through the air, acrid and choking. Alarms wailed, flashing red strobes painting the concrete walls. Nurses pushed wheelchairs, residents carried equipment, and shouts echoed as patients were ferried to safety. Adrian strode beside her, his long legs devouring the steps, his jaw clenched tight. Even here, in the chaos, he exuded command, his voice cutting through the din as he directed orderlies and calmed panicked patients. They reached a recovery room filled with post-op patients too weak to walk. The lights flickered above as the smoke thickened. "Bennett, take that side," he ordered, already lifting one frail man into a wheelchair. She obeyed without argument, muscles straining as she supported a trembling woman's weight. Together, they moved patients one by one, their movements quick, coordinated, efficient. But as they prepared with the last two, the fire alarm system sputtered, then failed. The lights cut out, plunging the room into near darkness. "Damn it," Adrian muttered. He pulled out a small penlight, its weak beam slicing through the smoky air. "Stay close." Lila swallowed hard, nodding. They pushed forward, guiding patients into the stairwell. But halfway down, shouts rang out below. "Blockage! Debris on the landing!" Adrian cursed under his breath. They had to reroute. Quickly. He looked at Lila. "Storage corridor. This way." The storage corridor was narrow, lined with metal shelving and crates. Now, the smoke was thicker here, the emergency lighting barely illuminating their path. The air grew hotter, heavier. They set their patients safely at the corridor entrance, watched over by a pair of orderlies, then pressed deeper to check for stragglers. "Stay close," Adrian said again, his voice low, rough, the penlight bobbing as he led. Lila followed, pulse racing, the nearness of him almost as dizzying as the smoke. His shoulders brushed the shelves, broad and unyielding, and she had to squeeze close behind him to avoid knocking into supplies. At the end of the corridor, they found a locked maintenance door. Adrian rattled the handle, cursed, then turned back. And that was when a ceiling tile gave way. With a sudden groan, part of the ceiling collapsed, sending debris crashing down. Adrian reacted instantly, shoving Lila hard against the wall, shielding her with his body as plaster and dust rained around them. Her gasp was smothered by the heat of him pressed flush against her, his chest hard and solid, his breath hot near her ear. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to nothing but the thunder of her pulse, the weight of him pinning her, the sheer force of his presence. "You all right?" His voice was rough, urgent. She nodded quickly, her words catching in her throat. "You?" He pulled back just enough to look at her, the beam of his penlight catching the sharp lines of his face, the storm in his eyes. His hand still braced her hip, fingers splayed as if reluctant to let go. Their gazes locked, and suddenly the danger, the smoke, the chaos, all of it receded. All she could feel was the fire licking between them, hotter than anything burning above. "Adrian?" she whispered. His breath hitched, his jaw tightened. For one tortured second, it looked like he might shove the moment aside, bury it like he always did. But something broke. With a low, guttural sound, his mouth crashed onto hers. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined. It wasn't careful or tentative or sweet. It was fierce, hungry, desperate, like a man starved for too long. His hand slid to the back of her neck, pulling her closer, while her fingers fisted in his scrub top, clinging as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. The heat of him consumed her, the taste of him. Salt, smoke, and something that was wholly, devastatingly Adrian flooded her senses. She moaned into his mouth, and he swallowed the sound, deepening the kiss, his tongue sweeping against hers with a hunger that made her knees buckle. For once, he didn't hold back. For once, he let himself burn. When he finally tore away, both of them were gasping, foreheads pressed together, the penlight dangling uselessly from his hand. "This shouldn't," he panted. "We can't." But his grip on her waist told another story, fingers digging in like he couldn't let go. Her own voice trembled. "Then why does it feel like we already crossed the line a long time ago?" He groaned softly, eyes shutting, as though the truth in her words gutted him. Then shouts echoed down the hall. Rescue crews, the crackle of radios. Reality slammed back in. Adrian stepped back sharply, dropping his hand, his face shuddering into steel once more. "Let's move," he said hoarsely. And just like that, the storm inside him vanished behind walls again. But Lila knew better now. She had tasted the fire beneath, and there was no going back. Chapter 6. Forbidden Fire. The storm outside had long since passed, leaving the hospital wrapped in an uneasy stillness. But inside Lila, the storm raged louder than ever. It had been 2 days since the fire scare. 2 days since Adrian Hale's mouth had crushed against hers in a kiss that had scorched her down to the bone. She couldn't sleep, couldn't think. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the press of his chest against hers, the desperate way his lips had claimed her, the taste of heat and hunger that had unraveled her from the inside out. And every time she saw him in the ER since, it was worse. He was colder, harder. He barked orders with more distance than usual, never looking at her for more than a second. It was as if he'd built an even taller wall overnight. But the problem was, she knew what was behind that wall now. She had touched it, tasted it, and she couldn't forget. It was past midnight when the ER finally quieted. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting long shadows across empty beds. Lila had just finished checking vitals on a stable patient when she heard a familiar voice call from behind her. "Bennett, with me." Her pulse jumped. Adrian stood at the charting desk, dark scrubs clinging to his lean frame, eyes unreadable. She opened her mouth to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. Low, clipped, almost strained. Wordlessly, she followed. He led her into one of the small on-call rooms, closing the door behind them. The room was barely larger than a closet, furnished with a narrow cot, a chair, and a desk. The air was thick with quiet. Her heart thundered. "What is this?" she asked, her voice catching. Adrian turned, and for the first time in days, his eyes weren't cold. They were burning. Before she could blink, he was on her. His hands framed her face, his mouth crashing onto hers with a force that stole the air from her lungs. She gasped, but the sound was swallowed as his tongue slid against hers, hot and hungry. It wasn't careful. It wasn't restrained. It was wild. Desperate. The kiss of a man who had held back too long. She moaned into him, her hands clutching his shoulders, dragging him closer. Weeks of tension, of stolen glances and sharp words ignited into flame. He pressed her against the wall, his body pinning hers, but his hand trailing down to her waist, gripping tight as though he couldn't get enough. "God, Layla," he groaned against her lips, her name sounding ragged, broken, like a prayer and a curse all at once. Her knees weakened as his mouth trailed down her throat, hot and urgent. She arched against him, fingers threading through his hair, tugging him closer, closer, until there was no space left between them. When his hand slid beneath the hem of her scrub top, rough palms skimming over heated skin, she shivered, gasping his name. "Adrian." Something inside him snapped at the sound. With a low growl, he lifted her effortlessly, her legs wrapping around his waist as his mouth claimed hers again. She clung to him, lost in the fire, lost in the man who had sworn he couldn't, wouldn't, yet was unraveling her completely. They tumbled onto the narrow cot, mouths still fused, hands roaming frantically. Scrubs became an obstacle, pulled at, shoved aside, discarded in the heat of urgency. Skin against skin, every inch burned hotter. The world narrowing to the press and grind of bodies that had denied too much for too long. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't slow. It was raw, consuming, the kind of passion that came from restraint finally breaking. Every thrust, every kiss, every touch screamed of desperation, of hunger, of a need too long buried. Lila gasped his name over and over, clutching him like he was the only thing tethering her to the earth. And when he finally shattered with her, his forehead pressed to hers, his breath ragged, she knew she was ruined, completely and utterly ruined for anyone else. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating. For a long moment, the only sounds were their ragged breaths, the faint hum of the fluorescent light overhead. Then Adrian shifted, slowly, carefully, pulling away. Adrian, she whispered, reaching for him. But he stood abruptly, dragging his scrub top back over his head, his back turned to her. Don't. His voice was sharp, frayed. Her chest tightened. Don't what? Don't look at me like that, he bit out, like this meant something. The words hit her like a physical blow. She sat up, the sheet slipping from her shoulder, her heart splintering. Are you kidding me? You dragged me in here. You kissed me like you needed me. It was a mistake. His voice was flat now, steel layered over pain. Her throat closed, tears pricking hot at her eyes. A mistake? Yes. He finally turned, and the cold mask was back, his eyes shuttered. This can't happen again. Ever. Her breath caught, fury sparking through the ache. You don't get to decide that for me. You think this is a game, Bennett? You think you know what you're getting into? His voice rose, harsh and bitter. I can't give you what you want. I won't. Her heart cracked, but anger surged stronger. She slid off the cot, yanking her scrubs back into place. You know what your problem is, Adrian? You're a coward. You hide behind your walls and your rules because you're terrified of feeling anything real. But you do feel, and that scares the hell out of you. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. She shoved past him, her hand trembling as it flung open the door. Stay in your stone fortress, doctor, she spat, her voice shaking. But don't you dare tell me last night was nothing, because we both know it wasn't. The door slammed behind her, leaving Adrian Hale standing alone in the tiny room, his fists clenched, his storm-gray eyes burning with everything he refused to admit. That night, Lila cried herself to sleep for the first time since she'd started at St. Augustine's. Not because he hadn't wanted her, but because he had, and still walked away. Chapter 7. The Distance Between Us. The days that followed felt like walking through shards of glass. Lila had known heartbreak before, small things, disappointments, the sting of friendships lost. But this was different. This was a fracture inside her chest that refused to heal. Adrian Hale didn't look at her anymore. Not the way he had when he kissed her, desperate and starved. Not the way he had when his voice had broken on her name. Now he barely looked at her at all. He called her Nurse Bennett again, his tone sharp and distant, his clipped orders making it clear that the fire between them was to be buried in ash. He didn't linger, didn't soften, didn't let anything slip. And yet, she felt him everywhere. The burn of his gaze when he thought she wasn't watching. The tension in his shoulders whenever she stepped near. The quiet hitch of his breath in the rare moment their hands brushed over a chart or supply tray. He might have walled himself off, but his body still betrayed him. And her heart was a traitor too, because no matter how cold he was, she still wanted him. The ER was chaos that night. A bus accident had flooded St. Augustine's with patients, the trauma bay lined with stretchers. Alarms shrieked, monitors beeped, voices rose and clashed as teams scrambled to stabilize broken bodies. Lila worked tirelessly, moving from patient to patient, hands steady though her pulse raced. Blood smeared her gloves, sweat clung to her hairline, but she never stopped moving. And everywhere she turned, Adrian was there. Tall, commanding, brilliant. His voice cut through the noise, sharp with authority. His hands were steady as steel, saving lives with ruthless efficiency. But he didn't look at her. Not once. Until the boy came in. 17, broken ribs, collapsed lung. His skin was waxy pale, his breath shallow and ragged. The paramedics shouted vitals as they wheeled him in, and Adrian's head snapped up. Bennett? With me! The words struck Lila like lightning. For the first time in days, he had chosen her. She swallowed hard and nodded, stepping in beside him. Needle decompression now, Adrian barked, already tearing open a kit. I'm on it. Her hands moved automatically, years of training guiding her as she prepped the site. Together, they worked in seamless rhythm. Adrian's orders crisp, Lila's execution precise. Their movements were fast, fluid, a dance carved from urgency. When the boy gasped, the first true breath hissing into his lungs, relief swept through them both. Lila looked up, meeting Adrian's eyes without meaning to. And in that moment, the world stilled. His storm gray gaze locked on hers, raw and unguarded. Relief, fear. Something deeper, darker, aching. Her chest squeezed. But then he blinked, shuddering it away, turning back to the boy. Stabilize him and prep for CT, he ordered, his voice cold again. The moment was gone. Hours later, when the flood of patients had slowed, Lila found herself alone in the supply room, leaning against the shelves, exhaustion dragging at her bones. The door opened. Her breath caught as Adrian stepped inside. He froze when he saw her, tension tightening his jaw. For a long moment, silence pressed between them. The air was thick, suffocating. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. You can ignore me all you want, Adrian. Pretend nothing happened, but you can't erase it. Not from me. Not from you. His throat worked, but his expression stayed hard. You don't understand. Then make me understand, she whispered, her eyes burning. Because right now, all I know is you kissed me like you needed me, touched me like you couldn't stop, and then you treated me like I was nothing. His jaw clenched. He turned away, bracing a hand against the shelf, his shoulders taut with strain. You weren't nothing, he said, his voice rough. That's the problem. Her breath hitched. He exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. I can't do this, Lila. I can't feel like that again. Every time I let someone close, they end up ripped away. I won't. He cut himself off, his voice breaking on the words. Her heart ached, the sharp edge of anger blunted by the rawness in his tone. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as it hovered near his arm. Adrian? He turned suddenly, eyes blazing, pain and desire warring in their depths. For a heartbeat, she thought he might reach for her. Kiss her again, tear down the walls he'd built. But instead, he stepped back, away. You should stay away from me. His voice was quiet now, hollow. Her throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She straightened, her chin lifting. No, I won't. Something flickered in his gaze, longing, desperation, but he crushed it quickly, his face hardening again. Without another word, he turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. And Lila stood alone, her heart bleeding, but her resolve stronger than ever. Because Adrian Hale could run, could hide, could drown himself in his walls of ice, but she had seen the fire beneath, and she wasn't about to let it burn out. Chapter 8. The Grovel. The hospital had quieted, though only in the way it ever did, muted instead of chaotic, dimmed but never still. Lila moved through the halls with exhaustion clinging to her, her scrubs wrinkled, her hair pulled loose from its bun. She should have gone home hours ago, but her body refused to leave. Part of her was waiting. For him. Adrian had been a ghost all day, locked in his office or tucked into patient charts, his distance sharper than ever. Every clipped word, every turned shoulder, every refusal to meet her eyes had driven splinters into her chest. And yet she stayed. She told herself it was duty, that the unit needed her. But her heart knew better. It was him. Always him. She found him in the physician's lounge long after midnight. The lights were low, one lamp casting a tired glow over the room. He sat on the worn leather couch, elbows on his knees, his white coat discarded on the armrest. His head hung low, fingers digging into his hair as though he could claw away whatever demons haunted him. For a moment, she only watched. The man looked less like the god of the trauma bay and more like a man crumbling under the weight of ghosts. Adrian, she said softly. His head snapped up. The rawness in his eyes nearly stopped her breath. You shouldn't be here. She ignored that, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Then tell me why you keep pushing me away, because I'm done pretending I don't see you breaking every time you look at me. His jaw tightened, his throat working as he fought for composure. You don't want to know, Lila. Yes, I do. Her voice wavered, but she stood her ground. I deserve to know. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then he broke. I had a fiancée. His voice was hoarse, cracked. 3 years ago, she was light, everything I wasn't, and I loved her in ways I didn't think I was capable of. He swallowed hard, his hands fisting against his knees. But I couldn't save her. Lila's chest squeezed. She was in a car accident, wrong place, wrong time. By the time they brought her in, it was already too late. And His voice shattered, his breath catching. He shut his eyes, fighting it, but his shoulders shook. I was the surgeon. I worked on her. I tried, God. I tried. But I lost her on my table. My hands, the same hands that were supposed to protect her, failed. The air punched from Lila's lungs. He lifted his head, his eyes burning into hers, wet with a pain he never let anyone see. That's why I can't let you close, because the moment I care, the moment I let myself want, it gets ripped away. And I can't. His voice broke. I can't lose you too. Her throat tightened, tears sliding down her cheeks unchecked. Oh, Adrian, she whispered, stepping forward. Her hands found his face, cradling him, forcing him to look at her. You didn't fail her. You loved her. And that loss wasn't your fault. His breath shuddered against her palms, his eyes closing. You don't understand? I do. Her voice trembled, but it was fierce. Because I'm standing here. And I'm not afraid. You can push me away, but it won't change the fact that I've already chosen you, and I'm not going anywhere. Something in him cracked then, truly cracked. His hands flew to her waist, dragging her into him. Desperate and trembling. His forehead pressed to hers, his breath ragged. I'm sorry, he whispered, broken. I've been cruel, cold. I thought it would protect you, but it only hurt you, and I hate myself for it. Her tears fell against his skin as she cupped his jaw, then stop running. He kissed her like a drowning man clutching air. It wasn't careful, wasn't restrained. It was fire and ruin, teeth and tongues, the clash of despair and need. His hands gripped her as though she might vanish, pulling her onto his lap, holding her against the hard line of his chest. Lila gasped into his mouth, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body arching to his. The heat between them ignited, years of hunger compressed into moments. Tell me to stop. He rasped against her lips, his breath hot and ragged. Don't you dare, she whispered, her voice fierce. His groan was guttural, torn from somewhere deep as he kissed her again, harder, deeper. And in that kiss, in the desperate press of mouths and the trembling grip of hands, Adrian Hale's walls finally shattered. Later, when their breaths slowed and the storm quieted, Lila lay curled against him on the couch, her cheek pressed to his chest. His hand traced the line of her back in slow, reverent strokes. You deserve better, he murmured, voice thick with remorse. She lifted her head, meeting his eyes. I deserve honesty, and now I finally have it. He swallowed, his thumb brushing her cheek. I'll spend every day proving I can be the man you need. Her lips curved, soft but certain. Good, because I wasn't going to let you go anyway. He huffed a broken laugh, pulling her closer, his mouth pressing to her hair. God help me, Lila Bennett. You're going to ruin me. She smiled into his chest, her heart finally unburdened. No, she whispered, closing her eyes. I'm going to save you. Chapter 9. Together in the fire. The hospital never slept. It shifted. It breathed, and sometimes it roared. That night, it roared. Lila barely had time to pull her scrub top back over her head after a stolen moment of tenderness with Adrian before the call came in. A multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate, dozens of casualties en route. The ER surged to life, alarms piercing the halls, voices raised in a rush of controlled chaos. Adrian's arm had lingered around her waist for one heartbeat too long before he pulled away, slipping back into his armor. But this time his walls weren't to shut her out. They were to shield everyone else, to lead, and she was right there beside him. The first ambulances screamed into the bay. Blood, cries, bodies bent and broken. The air filled with the metallic tang of iron, the heavy weight of fear. "Bennett, trauma one with me," Adrian barked, striding toward the gurney rolling in. "Yes, doctor." She kept pace, her pulse thundering. The patient was a woman in her 40s, chest crushed by the steering wheel, breaths rattling, shallow and wet. Lila had seen death before, but this was teetering close. "Chest tube now," Adrian ordered. His eyes flicked to hers, and for a flash, just a flash, his hand brushed hers as he reached for the kit. A silent vow. "I trust you." She nodded, her fingers steady even as adrenaline coursed through her veins. They worked in sync, hands moving fast, words sharp, efficiency honed to survival. The tube slid into place, blood gushed, the woman's lungs reinflated with a desperate gasp. "She's breathing," Lila whispered, her chest heaving. Adrian's jaw was set, but his eyes flicked to her, softening for a heartbeat before he turned back to the patient. "Stabilize her and prep for surgery." And then the next gurney came in. And the next. Hours blurred. A boy with a shattered femur, a man with half his face torn open, a child screaming for her mother. Lila's gloves were soaked in blood, her body aching, but she didn't stop. Not when Adrian was there, storming through the chaos like an unyielding force of nature. His voice cut through the noise, his hands worked miracles, and she, God help her, was tethered to him through it all. There were moments, in the rush of it, when their eyes met across the room. Moments that stole her breath. The way his gaze lingered on her even for half a second, as if she was the anchor holding him steady amidst the carnage. And she realized he wasn't shutting her out anymore. He was letting her in. Near dawn, the flood finally slowed. The waiting room had thinned, the trauma bay no longer overflowing. Lila leaned against the counter, her legs trembling, sweat plastering her hair to her temples. Adrian appeared at her side, his scrubs streaked with blood, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But when he looked at her, something softer bloomed there. "You were incredible tonight," he said, his voice low, rough from hours of shouting orders. Her heart stumbled. "So were you, as always." He shook his head, a humorless huff escaping him. "No, not as always, not without you." His gaze held hers, steady and intent. "I don't know if I would have held it together if you weren't here." The confession lodged in her chest like a blade. Her lips parted, but no words came. She just stared at him, the rawness in his face, the way his guard had fallen completely for once. And then he stepped closer. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, close enough that the scent of antiseptic and sweat and him filled her lungs. His voice dropped, a rasp meant only for her. "When I told you to stay away, it was the biggest lie I've ever spoken. Because, Lila," he reached up, brushing a strand of hair back from her damp forehead, his fingers trembling, "you're the only thing keeping me from drowning." Her breath hitched, her chest aching with the weight of it. "Then don't let go." Something fractured in his expression then, the storm inside him seeding to something fiercer. Want, need, hunger. Before she could blink, his mouth was on hers. The kiss was searing, reckless. Not like the desperate confession in the lounge, not like the first forbidden brush of lips. It was something else entirely. A claiming, a promise. Her hands fisted in his bloodied scrubs, pulling him closer, her body melting into his. His groan vibrated against her lips as his hand cupped the back of her head, the other gripping her hip like he couldn't bear to let her go. The world around them faded, the monitors, the footsteps, the faint hum of hospital life. For a moment, there was only them. When he finally tore back, his breath ragged, his forehead pressed to hers. His voice was a vow. I'm done running. Done pretending I don't need you. From now on, Lila, it's you and me, together, in the fire, whatever comes. Her eyes burned, her throat thick with emotion. Then don't break my heart, Adrian, because it's already yours. His jaw flexed, his lips ghosting hers again, softer this time, reverent. Never. I'll burn the whole damn world before I let that happen. And for the first time since she walked into St. Augustine's, Lila believed him. Chapter 10, The Final Surrender. The night arrived like a predator, dark, cold, heavy with the promise of chaos. St. Augustine's emergency room hummed with a low, persistent tension. The halls were dim, the fluorescent lights flickering intermittently, painting long shadows across the linoleum floor. It should have been quiet. It wasn't, because tonight the ER demanded every ounce of them. Lila Bennett tightened her scrub top over her chest and adjusted her gloves for the 20th time that shift. Her pulse still throbbed from adrenaline. The memory of last night's kiss, the taste of Adrian on her lips, the press of his body, still scorching her nerves. And she knew, as soon as she saw him stride into the bay, that he felt it too. His storm gray eyes met hers, hard but softened with an intimacy reserved only for her. His jaw, set like iron, betrayed the tension he fought to contain. Bennett, he called, voice low, sharp, and commanding. With me. Her heart jumped, a wild drumbeat in her chest. She followed without hesitation. There was no space between them anymore, literally or figuratively. The call came from the ambulance bay, a multi-level collapse at a construction site. Multiple casualties, some critical, some trapped. Move fast, Adrian barked. His hand brushed hers as they ran, fingers grazing with that familiar spark that always made her pulse leap. Adrenaline flared. They were a unit now, flawless in coordination. Every order, every movement, every glance communicated volumes that words could never reach. The first patient arrived, a man pinned under heavy beams, unconscious, blood pooling beneath him. Bennett, assist with the airway. I need suction and intubation now, Adrian shouted. Yes, doctor. Her hands flew, steady, efficient, but her chest pressed close to his, her body trembling under the heat of proximity. He leaned over the patient, their shoulders brushing. The contact was electric, her pulse quickened. She swallowed hard, struggling to focus. Focus. Lives depend on it. But Adrian's presence was magnetic, commanding, overwhelming. Her breaths came faster, her body tightening. He noticed. Lila, he rasped, voice low, meant only for her. Stay with me. Eyes on me. She did. She always did. The patient stabilized. Another arrived. Child, shattered leg, shock. The chaos swirled, but the world narrowed to Adrian and her. They moved seamlessly, bodies brushing, hearts pounding in sync. Hours blurred, sweat, blood, fear clung to them. Every rescue, every life saved, bound them closer. And when the last patient was wheeled away, breathing finally steadied, Lila realized she was exhausted, not just from the physical strain, but from every stolen glance of every brush of his hand, every unspoken promise lingering in the air between them. Adrian leaned against the counter, chest heaving, hands trembling slightly. She could see it in the line of his jaw, the storm behind his eyes, the vulnerability he never let anyone see. She stepped closer, hand brushing his arm. You did it, she whispered. We did it. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair, then finally looked at her, fully, vulnerably. His gaze was molten. Bennett. She shivered at the sound of her name from his lips, guttural, raw, laden with desire. Without thinking, she stepped into his space. Her lips found his. This time there was no hesitation, no restraint, only fire. Hands tangled, bodies pressed, hearts pounding in unison. Scrubs became irrelevant. The world narrowed to them. The heat, the need, the ache that had been building for weeks. Adrian lifted her effortlessly onto the counter, hands roaming, mouth claiming hers with a desperation that left her breathless. She clung to him, her fingers dragging across his back, down his spine, feeling every taut muscle, every heartbeat. God, Lila, he groaned, voice ragged, teeth grazing her ear, sending shivers down her spine. I can't, not you. You won't have to, she whispered, pressing her body fully against his, feeling him respond with a force that left no doubt. Every kiss, every touch, every gasp was confession and promise all at once. And then finally, when the chaos of the night and their own desire had consumed them, they collapsed into each other, breathless, trembling, skin slick with sweat, hearts hammering in perfect sync. Adrian buried his face in her neck, murmuring her name like a prayer. I love you, he whispered. Tears pricked her eyes. I love you too, she said, voice breaking. For the first time, there was no wall, no pushing away, no fear, just them, vulnerable, raw, together. The storm outside had passed long ago, but inside St. Augustine's, in that quiet aftermath of chaos and survival, they found their calm. Together. And nothing would ever come between them again. The end. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe if you would love to read one more chapter that keeps you in the loop.